Chapter 24. Wilkes sat in what passed for a rec room on this tub, staring at the view of the MacArthur provided by the nose cam he'd managed to program to track Spears' vessel. The other ship was maybe half a click ahead and slightly offset relative to their ship. They could have been directly astern of the Mac, given that G-drives didn't spew dangerous flux, but the manoeuvre was an old one, adopted when such things had still been a problem. Against the backdrop of blackness and pinpoints of unblinking stars, the other ship appeared frozen. There was no sense of movement. Spears' ship just seemed to hang there. Even the drone of their own engines was merely background sound, like being inside some big factory that throbbed but certainly wasn't going anywhere. As in all military ships designed to be sailed or flown by men, the Jackson had certain supplies carefully stored away. Ship's rations weren't ever going to top anybody's culinary lists, but you could survive eating them. There was enough food stashed to keep Wilkes and Billy alive, and even healthy, for years. All the proper vitamins and minerals carefully included. That was assuming they stayed in normal space, droning along under the gravity drives. Billy didn't talk much these days, but Wilkes understood that. She was grieving, and the way he saw it, rightly so. He'd tried to warn her, back when he'd first seen it coming, but she hadn't listened. It didn't make him feel smug to think that he told her so. That was the problem with being older, and maybe a little wiser in the ways of the galaxy. You thought you had something to offer. Only thing was, almost nobody ever wanted to hear it. Billy was a kid. He was old enough to be her father. Not that he'd ever thought of himself as the fatherly type, but he had seen the grief between her and Beulah coming a long way off. He'd tried to tell her, to spare her, but she was like the new colonial marine recruits he'd seen over the years. Fresh, convinced that nobody had ever done anything except them, reinventing the wheel for themselves. They seldom said it, but Wilkes had learned to hear it in their unspoken thoughts. Old fart like you. What can you know, Gramps? You were never young. Or if you were, it was so long ago you've forgotten what it was like. Save your breath, old man. You'll need it to totter off to your grave. Fucking kids. They were right about one thing. It was hard to remember when he'd been that stupid. He could recall it, but it made him want to shake his head. If he got stuck in a lift with the topectomy he'd been at 19, he would probably throttle the self-righteous little bastard after 5 minutes. 3 minutes. Wilkes? Huh? What are we going to do? He shrugged. He could have taken her question to mean a whole bunch of things, but he knew what she meant. What are we going to do about Spears? The man was long past sanity. He'd left his troops to die, had killed many of them himself, and was now on a fool's errand that would certainly be the end for them all. Wilkes. Right now, nothing. We don't have any armament, nothing to shoot with except the hand weapons, which don't do us any good against a ship like that, even if we could figure out a way to hit it from here. Oh yeah, we could go EVA. We've got a few suits, but we're accelerating, and there's no way we can make up the relative speed. The squirt guns in the suits wouldn't push us hard enough. That's not to mention what would happen if Spears decided it was time to make the leap into Einstein while we were outside dicking around. Billy blinked. He couldn't tell if she was really interested in this or not, but he pretended she was. See, the drive fields pretty much follow the contours of the ship generating them. If we were hugging the hull, maybe we'd go along for the ride. But anything that stuck out, an arm or a leg or a head maybe, would be left behind. Billy blinked again. Didn't speak. The field is better than any armor we've ever devised, you know. Nothing gets through it. So we couldn't get back inside. So even if we didn't get razored in half, there we'd be, outside the ship for however long we were in the warp. Months, a year, maybe longer. Maybe that wouldn't be so bad, Billy said. Maybe. If you don't mind running out of oxy and choking to death on your own CO2. Then, when the ship did drop back into end space and eventually started to decelerate, our bodies would zip on ahead and probably spend eternity tumbling through space. There are better ways to shuffle off. And worse, Billy said. Yeah, there are worse. So where does that leave us? Waiting. We can wreck this ship. Spears doesn't want that, not with his little army of monsters on board. Maybe we can threaten him, tear out the computers, get control somehow, ram the son of a bitch. Or maybe, once we come out of the warp and start to slow down, we get a chance at something. Such as? Hell, I don't know, Billy. I don't have all the answers. You got here the same time I did. Maybe if you weren't feeling so fucking sorry for yourself, you might come up with something. She stared at him. You knew Mitch was an android. Before I ever met him, you knew. You didn't tell me. Wilkes glared back at her. Yeah, and I tried to tell you to stay away from him, didn't I? You weren't having any of it. You can't blame this one on me, kid. I did everything but lock you in your quarters to keep you away from Beulah. It never occurred to you that I might know what the hell I was talking about, did it? Old chemhead 20-year grunt. What the fuck could I know about anything, right? Billy looked down, said, You're right. It wasn't your fault. I'm sorry. He felt his anger evaporate. Jesus. Big tough Marine, beating up on the little girl. It's okay. I'm sorry too. That was all either of them had to say for the moment. Before they could pick up the thread of the conversation again, the ship's warning buzzers sounded. Shit, that's the 10-minute signal. We're going into warp, he said. Better get to the sleep chambers. What's the hurry? Warp space does ugly things to your mind if you stay awake. I did half an hour once, part of a test group. It makes your worst nightmares seem tame. She shuddered, and he knew how she felt. They had both dreamed about the aliens too many times, and those visions were horrible enough. They hurried towards the sleep chambers. Spears had 3 chambers from which to choose, all of which were functioning perfectly. He was normally not a triple redundancy man when it came to his personal safety, but this mission was bigger than a single human. Nothing must be left to chance at this stage. He climbed into the center chamber. All 3 of the hypersleep tubes had been rigged with special alarm systems. If any of the bioelectrics in his life support system should malfunction, he would be awakened and given the command to transfer to another chamber by a recording of himself. Even if he were half asleep, he would understand the order well enough to make the change. Not that he thought any such malfunction would happen, but if it did, he was prepared. In due course, he would arrive in the vicinity of Earth. In due course, he would spot where the retaking of Terra would begin. He intended that it be some historical battlefield. Gettysburg, the Alamo, Waterloo. Perhaps the Plain of Jars or the ruins of El Salvador. Somewhere symbolic to rally men behind him and his new army. He had considered a new place, somewhere untouched by the mighty engines of war, but no. Standing on the shoulders of some historical giant would only add to his own stature. Besides, there were so few spots on Earth that had never seen any war. Offhand, he couldn't even think of one. Might as well choose a site with well-known glory. As the lid of the chamber clamshelled down, and the medical machineries hummed to life and connected themselves to him, Spears considered his choices. Iwo Jima, Hiroshima, Normandy, Cape Town, Bunker Hill, the Rio de Morte, Pearl Harbor, the Golan Heights, Baghdad, the 38th parallel, Sparta, Rome. So many places from which to select. What a wonderful thing war was.